Okay, I think we're live. So welcome back everyone to the FPL Script. This is season 2, episode 30, otherwise the blank Gameweek29 preview for the 23-24 FPL season. I'm your co-host, FPL__Fran on Twitter, with my co-host at Schadenfreudis with a 1. We're here to recap a couple things, not just free hit 29, but also, Schadenfreudis, my co-host here, JD, is also looking at just conventional strategy as someone who's planning for potential free hit 34s. Or free at 38. And of course, in terms of chip strategy developments, the most sort of mind-blowing development of today is what Review released. And we'll talk about that right after we just quickly review a pretty nice Gameweek 28 for the both of us. I ended up with 75 points. A lot of sort of supercharged variants from Bruno. It feels nice, to be honest, but in reality, I think I've suffered quite a bit from Foden. So that was enough, I felt like I deserved something, and I got something, so very lucky. And when I think about it now going forwards, because I'll need Bruno again on Game Week 30. I'm gonna have to ask my brother for a favor again. So we'll see how that goes. What about you, JD?
Don't forget that I thought you were going to mention the fact that Bruno didn't take the second penalty
Oh,
because
yeah. You
I,
know
I
what?
was,
I'm grateful
yeah, I
for
was so
one.
psyched.
So
I was so psyched for you, honestly, because
mm.
we hadn't had, and I mentioned it to you, right?
I
When you
even
asked
said,
me,
what are the chances that he can get
yeah,
two
yeah,
pens?
yes. And I said to you that we hadn't gotten a penalty in ages, so it's not that far off.
Unlikely. Yeah.
So, and that's crazy
And we
that
got
he
it,
got
and
one.
I didn't get the
That's,
goal.
but we know that as soon as he scores, he's most likely to get 3 bonus points. So I'm glad that at least
He played a good
happened,
game, to be
and
honest.
he
Like
did, he
I
did.
watched, and
So yeah, yeah,
good
yeah. The
chances,
number of
good for one goal,
chances,
one
yep,
assist.
yep,
Yeah, yeah.
yep. And the free kick also, maybe on another day, if a goalkeeper is
Just a bit
slightly
worse. Yeah, yeah.
lethargic, he could have easily
No,
scored
you're
that
right.
one. So absolutely glad to see him
But
score, and
you
anyone
made a
that
point
owns him,
too. You quote tweeted review,
yeah,
I think, and you said, "Is his EV going to change?" But I think the reality is, yes, his EV is
yeah.
going to change. And I think I've seen it. Like Bruno's EV has dropped a bit, and
Ooh.
that kind of gutted me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay, okay. So first of all, just to be clear, I didn't mean it like for you. I
Yeah.
just
No,
was
but it's
trying to be
reality as
cheeky.
well.
But yeah, fair enough. I know you wouldn't recognize it, but at the same time, I hope it's not that bad. So yeah. So coming to my week again, as Fran said, I had a good week as well. I was a little gutted, just like Fran. I'm grateful for all the points, but again, Morris assist Barkley goal is
Close. Yeah.
unbelievable. It was so bad, and it's fine though. The problem is I was looking at Barkley for both games, and I could not find him over the halfway line. So every touch he was having was almost in and around the halfway line. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how is this guy going to score? Like, there's no way. Like, I can't see him scoring except on set pieces, of course.
Yeah.
And the one counter attack they had after scoring 2 goals is, I mean, I'm quite fortunate to have him score because review didn't rate him highly at all. His EV for 2 games was 6.3 or something. So it was clearly a pick where I was hoping for one return and then he grabs 3 bonus because his baseline BPS is just crazy
Mm.
because of his passing
No,
and
it's
ball
true.
recovery. So I'm glad that happened. And other than that, I mean, Morris not getting anything is just fine because Holland got nothing. If Holland had gotten a goal, I would have been really down in the dumps. And Palmer, yes, I forgot to mention that. Palmer is the one that really killed my game week in a sense because the true gains I'm making, I have to discount most of the gains, right? Because later wildcards will catch up to me. So I was thinking if Cole Palmer can have a quiet night, of course that's not possible with
No,
them
no.
playing such a trash defense. And I said that to fellow wildcarders that we should not hope for a blank because the Newcastle defense is just bad.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened. So anyway, I'm going to bring him in 30, so that nightmare will end soon.
That's very fair. So let's discuss obviously the biggest development in the analytics space today. What you're seeing here as well is just a screenshot of a new sort of tool within Review that allows you to analyze your chip strategy. Now, this is a pretty controversial topic. I don't think we're going to spend as much time
Yeah.
on it as you as you might hope as a viewer. But I'll share my thoughts. I don't think we've even discussed this amongst ourselves, but I'm sure we're pretty closely aligned. Um, So what the tool is, of course, is that it is a chip strategy evaluation tool. So it allows you to kind of select the chip strategies that you're sort of thinking of. So for example, the ability to select different weeks for free hits, different weeks for wild cards, different weeks for bench boosting, and then sort of evaluate the chip plans. And so what you have here is an example of a completed evaluation from Shannon Freudis here, who's just wildcarded, looking at the evaluation for different chip strategies, looking at the 2 chips that he's got left to play. So the different bench boosts that he has and the different free hits. And so that's something, of course, that's very interesting, right? Because looking at this now, you can kind of think that chip strategy, in a sense, could be solved. That's sort of the or that's the theme, at least, that's been posed on Twitter. Now, of course, we know that this game is not solvable because, these outcomes, they're not fixed. Maybe I wish they were, but they're not. So it's always going to be our best guess. This is the reality of EV as it stands. And I think Simon discussed this on Twitter as well. I pretty much thoroughly agreed with his thoughts. It's just the idea that, for example, let's say if you're a wild card in Gameweek 28, you still have, an incomplete understanding of the fixtures and how they're going to fall on Gameweeks 34 and 37. The same way, for example, when I wildcarded a few weeks back, let's say if I ran an evaluation, it very well could have shown that wildcard 26 could have brought me the most expected value. But that, of course, is based on uncertainties as well, that we know that will sort of be, concretized, I suppose, later down the line. And you have to make these decisions and these judgments calls. And the only thing that's really changed substantially is that the hard work of actually running all these different drafts simultaneously, running them with all the things that you can see here, burn info in the bank value is 0, inverted decay, as you can see at the top left corner of the screen, running with the correct amount of solve depth and things like that. These things were things that we previously, as the hardcore analytics managers would have done ourselves anyways. But that's sort of now being reduced into one service. And that's an interesting thing, right? I think another thing to think about too is that the functionality of this service is not amazing. So let's say if you wanted to run with free transfer as default still in the future, or you still wanted to keep info value for whatever reason, things like that, I suppose you'd still need to tailor this in the future. Maybe there's going to be future accessibility. But the reality, of course, is that a lot of the work that you would have spent multiple hours doing and trying to get together is now sort of being reduced into something a little bit simpler and a little bit more accessible. And I think people have sort of just voiced the sentiment as part of an overall concern, in my opinion, over the last few years of how easy it is, honestly, to play FPL nowadays. But I still think that for me, like I find beauty in the game in terms of adjusting minutes and still thinking about things like, situations where I can grab risk. And Trout has also mentioned that within his own thread in terms of the idea that we still haven't really narrowed down risk management and, looked at, for example, also, risk appetite in general, like the ability to, I think Calm Meta is a player who very much has the sentiment where he's mentioned multiple times that he prefers, obviously, to take the free risk approach. We've talked about free risk on the pod a couple times. That's also sort of tangentially related to an aspect of FPL within the analytics community that I don't think maybe, Trout thinks, for example, is, concretized. But I think the reality is, from an expected value grabbing standpoint, we've probably touched close to the finish line, in my opinion, still. But there is, of course, adjusted minutes and a lot of luck that comes into things. And I've discussed this with you in the past. I think a lot of the sort of results that we get as well in FPL is very much dependent on like outcomes that you don't perceive, like injuries and things like that, and how you can be extremely lucky, for example, to have less money in the bank than someone else and suddenly wildcard into, a magical team that works on outcome. For example, let's say you were Salah only on wildcard 8. You would have been cooking if you kept Salah all the way till Game Week 17. If you somehow could afford a Salah Haaland draft, you trusted, for example, reviews expectations, you would have underscored your expectations. And these things happen time to time. So all in all, I think my general thought is, of course, this makes it a bit simpler for the average user. It takes away an edge in terms of the amount of hours you need to put into, I think, playing FPL at arguably the highest level. But for some other people, I don't think it makes much of a difference. You still need to put in the thought in terms of understanding fixture uncertainties, understanding how things can unfold, understanding different scenarios, and understanding that, you might still have, like, for example, this week it might say that my evaluation will show better for free at 34, bench was 37. But the next week, an injury can happen that sort of severely derails the free at 34 path, and suddenly free at 29 is optimal. But let's say if I made a free at 34 transfer as opposed to an agnostic transfer, I'm sort of locked into that line, and I've also lost potential EV in a different direction. I think we need to think about things like that. That's still going to complicate the game a lot. And yeah, as I said, there's still a lot of aspects in the season where we have a lot of uncertainty, and we need to think about that concretely as opposed to just saying, oh, the game is solved. And yeah, ultimately it's not solved for me, but that's sort of my take on it.
it
What about
it
you?
will never be solved, first of
Yeah,
all.
yeah,
And it's
exactly.
it's like, if anyone watches anime, it's like the infinity void in Jujutsu Kaisen, where it's like you can get as close as you can, and the more you try to get close, the slower it slows you down even further. So
Hmm.
it's exactly like that. It is never going to be solved. And so I retweeted one of Trout's many brilliant tweets on this matter, and the one I retweeted was the one where he says that essentially you are trying to linearize everything in order
Hmm.
to get to these sorts of models.
Yeah.
And I think I've mentioned previously on the pod, but if I haven't, so Sardalp and I had a long discussion about this previously, and the big point is that everything that review does in terms of optimization is based off heuristics, and is not true optimization in a sense. So I think optimization is still out there, first of all. So you would need to use something like what Sartalp has on his repository in GitHub. That is somewhere closer to maybe optimization. And within optimization as well, there's so much for you to accomplish that it's absolutely insane. Like, if you were to imagine the number of dimensions a problem like this would have, it's you would never be able to find the true optima, as you would call it. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty because it's frankly boring. But I unfortunately had to study this as part of my master's degree, and it's absolutely, it's as vast as you can imagine it is, this field. So another thing, just to, because I know that Frank has covered most of the things, so really don't want to rehash those topics. But an interesting thing that I realized is, I think it's like people's misplaced anger, in a sense where like people wanted to voice their frustration about this, and this was like the perfect catalyst for it.
Hmm.
Even though, as for example, Pras has already tweeted that this is simply reducing the donkey work.
Yes,
That is exactly what it is.
that's what
And
it is.
I replied to him saying that, okay, I am a little miffed about the fact that I know there are people in the world who would never do this otherwise, but now they can, because they can just click a button, go do their work, and come back, and they will have the results for it. So that's the only, but that's such a, like, see, you can't even quantify such things, right?
No, you
How many
can't.
players do I expect to switch from not being asked to being asked? Like, that's, it's such a, it's such a ephemeral thing. I don't think it's even worth mentioning, to be honest. But I said that to him because I just wanted to play devil's advocate in that case, that there will be some impact, but at the end of the day, I don't think this update is actually nothing. I think the review has published updates that have been much more revolutionary than this,
Yeah.
which never got the coverage they did, because ultimately it's up to how people perceive a certain change. So yeah, I mean, we are an analytics part firmly, but even if we weren't, I don't know how to say this other than the fact that this is simply that something that already existed.
No, and yeah, I mean, you're right, actually. As we said, it's just reducing work
Yeah,
that we would have put in ourselves, and now it's more accessible. But that also means, I think, whenever we've played game, or at least whenever I've played games competitively, we know that the meta changes, that people have access to tools. Like, if I was playing card games, you have, um, you're shown optimal paths, optimal deck builds, and from a game where, from a rudimentary point of view, you know nothing, and you're just building on intuition. Like,
yeah,
this is exactly that with where we are at right now with FPL, and we will continue to get developments that will help us, either reduce donkey work or actually make things more optimized for us, maybe.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
this is where we're at. I think part of it too is analytics has enjoyed a really good season. Potentially, quite a few of us are boasting about it too, and that's totally fair, because why not? take the chance to do so. You only get lucky this many times in life, I suppose. But the reality is, you look at a lot of analytics players, you look at their variance graphs, it's all positive. This doesn't
Yeah,
happen every
yeah,
season.
yeah.
We had review last season. We had review the
And
season
people are
before.
boasting. People that are boasting are definitely self-aware
Yeah,
that they know
yeah.
that
We
this
know
is
what positive variance is in
yeah,
theory, and we accept
yeah,
that for what it is. And when
exactly.
it doesn't work the other
So
way, I think we also don't look too poorly on it. So that's our take on that. Let's quickly move on to potentially the more meaty FPL related discussion for this week.
yeah,
Um,
I know we said that we wouldn't discuss it for long, but it is such a
no, it
vast
yeah,
topic that you end up talking about it a little bit.
no, it's
So
true.
fine. Yeah.
And to be fair, we've given a lot of thought to what needs to be done to get to this point. So I think we've sort of educated some of our viewers in terms of getting to this position. And now here we are.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, great. So this is the first free hit draft. This is just reviews MD default. Now, I know Watkins is potentially injured. Let's just say Watkins is a placeholder for now for Duran, because of course, if you know that Watkins is out for the weekend, I will say right now that the immediate replacement is Duran. Now, you might disagree with this because, of course, Watkins is a much more high quality player compared to Duran. And you might immediately think that Muniz, David Datro Fofana, and even Chris Wood are options. And I'm here to tell you that you're probably right. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's just appreciate this draft for what it is. Let's imagine that Watkins is available for the weekend. And then we can jump into that Watkins spot and also potentially what might come as a result of that. Because I think the reality is you either move to a 3-5-2, or you have enough confidence in some of the other forwards that you go to and remain in a 3-4-3, but maybe you don't invest in Aston Villa at all. And that's totally fine. But starting from the sort of top here, we've got Flecken as a goalkeeper. Part of this is purely because the clean sheet odds from an MD perspective do favor Brentford. And I don't think there's anything more to it. We already don't rate Flecken on the podcast. I still own Flecken, by the way. And I think you do too.
No,
Actually, no, don't. No, you didn't.
yeah,
No, you didn't go
I
Flecken.
almost went for him, but I chose not to.
Yeah,
So
but you made a personal choice.
yeah.
We've got Doughty, Pedro, Reguilon here. I think all of these are locks, except for a case and a situation where if let's say we find out that Richarlison is fully fit and we even get to the point where we think he's going to start, or let's say you somehow get a Brendan Johnson leak, which I think is very improbable. There are going to be scenarios where because the clean sheet odds for Spurs aren't very good versus Fulham, because it's an away fixture as well, that Porro could very well drop out from this draft. I think that's a point to be clear of, because the drop in terms of the expected value from someone like Flecken to someone like Sells in Nottingham Forest is not enough for you to sort of go a different way around it. If you actually get, let's say, Richarlison confirmed, I think you'd immediately go towards triple Spurs midfield, and you'd also drop Pedro Porro. So you drop Pedro Porro, and of course things would happen. I think leading most likely to a double Brentford defense and Doughty. Doughty, of course, is ridiculous because even though Luton actually have some of the worst clean sheet odds of all the players within this within this defense here, the biggest thing going for them, of course, is or rather for Doughty himself, is that his expected assist is nuts. And of course, he's a set piece taker, which, as we've seen time and time again, isn't just purely reflected by the expected assist. It has a lot of consequences in terms of bonus score and the
Yep.
ability to rack up bonus. And we've seen that with Pedro Porro, and we've seen that with Doughty himself just last week.
Yeah, he missed out on one bonus
I
point
think by one, yeah,
yesterday
by
by
one, yeah,
one,
yeah,
which is
and
crazy,
that
right?
was when
He
7 goals
conceded
were
four
scored.
goals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fair.
And then Reguilon, of course, conditional on him starting Pedro Porro, of course, just based on, as I said, the situation where we're not expecting severely good, Johnson, Werner. Kulishevsky, he has really bad baseline, so I don't think he would even
Yeah,
appear, even if you adjusted him to 90. So he's the one condition where you still probably wouldn't change your draft if you were grabbing EV. And that's that. In terms of the midfield, and actually I wanted to talk about Nico Williams, because Nico Williams appears here because Nottingham Forest actually have a lot of fullback injuries. Montiel, for example, recently had a setback. We also know that you've got Harry Toffolo as well. You also have Aina as well, but I don't think Aina's going to start. Williams has played well recently too. One of the few players who within Nottingham Forest has actually played well recently. So I think he will probably keep his spot in the team. So he's an interesting pick where, let's say, if you were to hedge completely against Luton, who are probably amongst non-free hit players, one of the few players owned within teams within FPL, then maybe you can actually look towards hedging against Luton entirely with the triple Nottingham Forest. But I still think clean sheet odds are very low. Nico Williams' underlying stats are actually pretty poor. I've noticed that he has worse baselines than Harry Toffolo. So it's not an amazing pick, but once again, just an idea, right? Konsa, of course, just your routine, boring pick because we don't have the same sort of faith in Cash. Maybe we should, but he's played a lot of minutes recently, and if there's ever a time to rotate, it very well could be this fixture. And then, of
Oh,
course, with
Cash scored today, by the way.
yeah, and
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think the thing is obviously, whether you take anything from that as well,
No, no,
he
no,
very
of
well
course.
could play,
I'm just saying.
and Konsa
Yeah,
can be replaced by Cash is my point. But then I think with the left
yeah.
back position, there's not even a discussion there to talk about. And then in the midfield, you've got Son, Madison, Bowen, Gibbs White. I think these are absolute locks. And the reason why these are absolute locks as well is if you look at the goal scoring odds and the assist odds for players like oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a good point, actually, in terms of notifications on. I will close my WhatsApp in the meantime. Apologies. But yeah, I think in terms of those four players in specific, they all trump all the other sort of midfield picks that actually we expect to have less than 90 minutes. So your Alangas of the world, who I've mentioned in the chat, your other players like maybe Bailey, of course, who features here. Maybe Alanga, of course, could eclipse Bailey if you've set them both to 90 minutes. But the reality is the four players before that do trounce everyone else, and they are part of an absolutely locked-in core. And then it goes down to Tony and Morris, who I think are also locked right now. Morris we expect to start, so there's no concern there. It's more a case of, once again, what the other picks are, right? You've got, if let's
Yep.
say Watkins is out, you're still missing, two spots. Well, you're missing one spot here technically, which could obviously once again go back to a midfield spot if you have no confidence in the forwards. So your Bailey / Alanga, or of
Mm.
course you go for Duran just as a right, like just outright replacement, or you look at Muniz, who we think will continue to start, and David Dacho Fofana. Now there's another pick. Obviously, it's Chris Wood. He's probably the diciest, but I also like him the most because in terms of MD odds, I think Chris Wood has slightly better goal scoring odds than Morris, which I kind of like the idea of playing with. I also think, in terms of targeting defenses this week, Luton probably the worst defense on offer here to target. So there's that. And yeah, Chris Wood's underlying stats have been pretty good this season. So has everyone else, though. I think Muniz has okay stats. We also think that he'll start. Do you have any concerns with Muniz just before we actually go into? I think let's just go through the sort of the outside edge picks. Like, what do you think about Muniz so far?
Yeah, outside his picks, and I guess we also will go into X-Men's for these players, and you've already talked about Chris Wood. So for Muniz, I saw someone retweet an article saying that
Is that
Fulham will
about
have to
Broya?
pay
Yeah.
Chelsea 4 million, and then I found out the full context, which is that they will have to start him in every single game,
Yep.
and otherwise they'll have to pay, which means that they will have to
It's
pay
not
four
happening.
million.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's not happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so this condition does not hold true, which means that there is no need for Broya to start.
Yeah.
Absolutely no need. And we know that managers are a little grassy at heart, some of them, and of course it makes sense from a footballing perspective as well. He's been playing well, and there's no need to play someone who might not even know the system as well. So I think Muniz's minutes are pretty good. Uh, when it comes to his EV, I think the main problem is penalties. We've already spoken about this last time on the pod, I think, or
Yeah.
the one before that. And I think you mentioned that Pereira has never taken one or something to that effect. So I guess we're looking
This
between
season.
Willian if he starts
Yep.
this season, of course,
Yep.
this season,
Yep. Yeah.
and Willian and Andres Pereira and Wilson. So is there an outside chance he takes the penalty? I guess, but I don't think that's going to be baked into his
He
expected
also
value at
doesn't
all.
have a penalty record. So that's something I've looked into as
Ooh,
well.
okay,
So that's pretty
that's
big. I've also looked
yeah,
into the
yeah.
MD of all of these players. So for anyone who's actually curious, I think David Dacho Fofana is right behind Muniz. And Muniz actually is level with Morris in terms of MD if you were to expect everyone to play 90 minutes.
Hmm.
One thing that's going against, let's say, Morris's favor is he did play midweek. So there is a chance, of course, pretty minimal, that he could be subbed early. Recently, we've seen a lot of minutes from Morris anyways. With Muniz, I think it's, look, I'm expecting a team like Fulham to be chasing. So I'm
Hmm.
struggling to believe that someone like Muniz is going to be hooked off. So I think
I,
he
I
he
also
he
agree
very
with you.
well should be going to 90
Yeah,
minutes, and I think that
yeah.
already makes him potentially a better pick than Bailey and potentially a better pick than other things. The only other thing that you might want to consider, of course, is like what the knock-on impact of, let's say, Watkins, leaving Aston Villa for this week might do for someone like Bailey, and of course, if you're I mean, taking your own, for example, Evie into the question, I suppose, once again, Luton team to target. Do you want to look at a player like Alanga, for example?
Yeah.
One
Okay.
last thing.
Also, one more thing.
Mhm.
You said that if you want to target Luton, right? So what I did in the meanwhile is I ran a solve excluding Luton for free hit,
Yeah.
and the only changes I can see is you have Martinez and Sells as your two goalkeepers, and I think
Hmm.
that's because you need triple Brentford in outfield because you no longer have Doughty. So you have Mads Roerslev instead of Doughty
Yeah.
in defense, and you have Paqueta instead of Bailey
Yeah.
because you have Konza and Watkins and Martinez as your
Yeah.
three Aston
But I
Villas.
think the thing too with a lot of the Nottingham Forest players is you do kind of have to adjust their minutes as well. Like if you think Elanga will start, you'd have to dial up his
Yes.
minutes. And
Yeah,
Chris Wood, I
and
think, is
Muniz, by the
yeah.
way, Muniz
Muniz,
is in
you'd
the
have to
team.
dial up.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris
No, no,
Wood,
no.
I
I'm
think.
saying he is in the team.
Oh right, he's in the
In this
team
team.
already.
Yes,
Okay, that's great.
he's
Because
in this team.
and yeah, you'd expect him to play more minutes as well. But another thing I'd mention too is like Chris Wood, I know has like 31 average expected minutes right now. Taiwo has 63. So the implication is Taiwo starts, but I'm not actually sure that's very likely. I think it's very likely that
Mm,
Chris Wood starts
yeah,
instead.
yeah,
And so just a point, of course, for anyone to sort of think about directionally where they want to go. But yeah, I think these are kind of the outside picks. I think it's close though, right? Like I think you have genuine locks, and it's really that Watkins spot now that is, or even that Morris spot, arguably that
yeah.
you could make some changes over, and it's the picks that we've been talking about, and um, yeah, I think if you, for example, have any reason to go for one player over the other, the difference is going to be an expected value of 0.1, 0.2. I'd say just go with what you believe in, because it's not like you're going to get some crazy expected value edge within this free hit. This is a chance that I think is even
Yeah.
nicer because if Watkins is actually injured, you've got more of an edge versus people who have been sort of planning within your direction. Sorry to, of course,
Hmm.
spoil your dinner, but you're actually on a path yourself. With owning Watkins within your team, you've planned for free at 34. Roughly, speaking, we saw that as well with the expected value of your chip
Yeah.
strategy solves. So, what are you thinking about? How to deal with Watkins? Like, how are you managing different scenarios in your head?
So for people like me who are not free hitting, just to clarify, I think
Yeah, you're
my
not free.
expressions have made it pretty clear. Of, and to people that don't know, Watkins got injured today playing in Conference League, right? Or Europe. I'm
I think
tripping.
it's, I think it's Europa, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. This can you please make just confirm that I've been looking at too many score lines today,
Yeah,
and
Conference League.
Liverpool. Yeah, conference. Okay, fine. I'm glad. So in the conference league, he scored. So he got injured. He scored, and then he got subbed because he was injured.
Yeah.
So it's a weird sequence of events, and from what I gather, we won't find out anything. So I'll just have to roll with it, I think. So the knock-on impact of this, funnily enough, is that if I do, let's say, Watkins to Tony this week, which I would probably have to do if I were to, let's say, immediately grab the expected value, uh, that means that I'll have to take a -4 in game week 30 for Salah and Palmer, which were my two
Mm,
free
I
transfers,
see. Okay.
or which were my planned free transfers.
Right.
And the problem with that is, forget about Salah and Palmer. Uh, I think having two free transfers for that international break, FA Cup
Mm,
sort of 2 week gap is critical for me. Someone that does not have a wild card anymore. If some other pressing issues come up, I can easily switch around. If it's one free transfer, I mean, I know when you talk about it like that, you can easily say, okay, so it's essentially a -4, right? In any case, like for example, if I were to spend one free transfer on Tony right now, and later on an injury crops up, what? Sorry, did I lose you?
no, no, no. I'm here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So, uh, the only thing that I'm trying to understand is how much EV am I giving up in long term? Because Watkins
Yeah.
is my transfer out in 31 anyway for
Mm,
Holland right now. So if that is the case and I bring that forward by 4 points, I'm starting to think maybe it is justified. So I think it's purely a judgment call. I think I'll have to, because I was planning on playing with 10 players anyway. So if Watkins is now not fit, I'll have to play with 9.
yeah. Another thing too is
So
you need to think about whether Watkins is going to be fit for Gaming 30, which you'll have
yes,
time
that
to
that is
recover, and
exactly
Watkins
right.
will have time
Yes.
to recover. But
Yeah.
it could be worse than imagined, and that
Yeah,
would
which
change
is
things.
why I ruled out John Duran immediately because when you mentioned him earlier, for a moment I thought, okay, maybe I can do this, and
Yeah.
that also frees up a lot of money, right? But the problem is he is of no use to me probably in game week
You
30,
could be thinking
probably.
about Muniz, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah. Low key.
yeah. Fulham is cooking,
You'd be backing the
honestly.
team that I love so dearly.
Yeah, yeah. But everything, I think it's everything is in flux because of this now.
Yeah, it is.
To a certain extent, to a certain extent. Honestly, I've even thought about Solanke to Tony because what that does is even if Watkins is fit, I get 11
Mm,
players. Is what if Watkins is not fit, I get 10 players.
true. Yeah.
So I could hedge like that. But the problem is if Bournemouth Wolves gets moved to 37, then I would have made the wrong decision probably. I know it's too far away and Solanke could possibly get injured and all of that, given the fact that he's also managing an
No, but
injury
you're right.
long
It would
term.
hurt you long term. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
And we know
So I
Watkins won't,
really don't want to do that.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fair.
And also, okay, the worst case scenario is that uh, if people know that there is a chance that there will be no double game week in game week 34, and we will only have one big double game week and one small double game week in 35 and 37. So if that happens, so I will need Solanke in 34 as well. So all of this is sort of see, there is no amount of review that's going to help me
Yeah.
out
And
here.
there's money in
It's
the
just
bank as
I need
well to consider.
exactly.
Watkins is more expensive.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, I could run all the solves in the world. It's not going to help me out in this case. I just need to make a judgment call on what I think are the possibilities of game week 34 being not a double game week 37 being the double game week for Bournemouth, and what are the chances of Solanke getting injured, I guess, which is not a consideration. That would just be cope, I think. If I start thinking like that, then I would just be thinking of reasons to transfer Solanke out. So sounds very convoluted and boring to a certain extent, but also is a lot of food for thought for anyone who is not free hitting.
no, I think that's fair. So, I
Yeah.
mean, going back to my point in terms of my free hit, yeah, I think one thing that
Yeah. Sorry. I
we
want to know what is your sorry
my
to
actual free
interrupt
hit,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So right now I'm considering, yeah, I'm assuming that Regulon's fit. So Regulon, Pedro Porro, Doughty, Son, Madison, Bowen, Gibbs, White, and then I'm going Tony, Muniz, and Chris Wood is what I'm
I like
thinking
it.
right now. But that Muniz spot will probably change. It could very well just be a Langa, and I could just go triple Nottingham Forest. So let's
I would
see.
honestly do it
Yeah.
because and it's not just based on the last game. It's based on every game that Luton has played.
No, they
There's
are
no
bottom
exception.
of the league for
Yeah,
XGC.
they are.
Like they are
So
a genuinely bad defense, as well as a
yeah,
generally decent offense nowadays. Like I think they're
yes,
now closer to Nottingham Forest on offense
yeah.
than they are, for example, like close to your Burnleys and Sheffields of the world. So Sheffield United, of course. I know some people in Sheffield will get upset at me, so
Oh yeah,
if I don't say
yeah.
that. So so that's that. But let's actually just I thought it'd be easy to discuss some chat questions because I think some of them were
Yeah.
free hit related. Um, but actually, I think touching back on it, so
Let's just
Joey from the start. I mean, also hi Adam, hi Mez, hi Harry, hi Joey, hi Omega, hi Chai, hi everyone else basically,
do you want to
and Ken
quickly
from
cover
Malaysia.
captaincy before
Yeah.
we
Oh,
do
actually,
this?
fine. Let's do captaincy. Fine.
Yeah,
Yeah. By the way, sorry. There was one change in terms of what you mentioned, but I think
yeah,
you did say that there was another variation of the draft, which would be okay. What happens if, let's say, we think Mbuma will start? This is also thinking about market odds because, of course, we have
yeah,
odds for Mbumo. He would basically find his way towards the team, although I think a lot of the market odds also assume that he's not going to start. So that's priced
yeah,
into his odds. And then it actually has sells over Flecken, which is very interesting, right? Because it kind of shows,
yeah,
I think if you're somewhat grasser, if you've seen Brentford's actual results in terms of the goals conceded versus the gulf in expected goals conceded, they have the biggest gulf this season, right, of all teams. So it makes sense that market would lean towards a keeper not named Flecken.
yeah. And
That's
also,
yeah,
Flecken has had a generational negative PSXG delta season, right? So
yeah,
that
exactly.
also contributes to
So
that.
things to think about, but not too many different changes. We have another attacking fullback in Asigion here as well, but that's really it. That's the difference. And yeah, let's move on to captaincy.
Yeah.
So captaincy's between two non-injured players. so far. Son and Tony. Son, I think, is clear, and he's even more clear on market, I've noticed. So for me, it feels like quite an easy decision to go Son. But now, of course, for all the other managers out there, like Tony appeals, first of all, because he's blanked a lot. So a lot of people are kind of just naturally against him. And then second of all, it is a good chance to get some free risk, at the opportunity cost of maybe like 0.6 expected value. So I
Yeah.
don't know what your thoughts are on captaincy.
No, 100%. I would go Son, and I am going Son. And if you wanted some free risk, I was just looking into what Fran mentioned about market odds, just trying to see what the difference is. Yeah, yeah, he is actually point 3 clearer of Tony. Son is, that is. So I
Yeah.
would definitely consider that as well. I don't see any reason not to captain Son, but again, as Fran pointed out, if you want to target Burnley sort of, and you're not happy with just having three Brentford players, that could be the play. Honestly, this in this one, if Son outscores Tony, I don't think it's just a case of bad luck because his EV is quite significantly better than Tony's. So do consider that while
Yeah.
making your
I guess some of the
captaincy choice.
implication as well is that we know Richarlison's out, and we're still taking that assumption that Richarlison is out. If let's say Richarlison's back, that might change our mind a little bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely sold on Son unless we get some crazy Richarlison news. Is basically
Yeah.
my thoughts on it.
If Richarlison is fit, then free 29 is the winner. There's like you'll gain so much EV in that in this week if
Yeah,
Richarlison is going to play. Yeah,
but
because
yeah, very likely.
Watkins out. Yeah, yeah,
Watkins out would be, and that would probably be the biggest dagger, to be honest, for all the
yeah.
people rolling
Yeah.
onwards. So yeah, let's go
Anyway,
to
sorry.
chat
Let's get
questions
back
then.
to the
No,
chat
no,
questions. Yeah.
absolutely. So Joey, thanks for shouting us out. Harry, congrats on your Semenyo haul. Omer says, do you have your solver settings on default, FT value and time decay? Yeah, for most of the season I do, but obviously if you're dead ending, you want to reduce your FT value. In terms of time decay, we do change that when we're trying to be objective about chip strategy. So when you look at the sort of additional aspect of the transfer solver now, so the new chip timing solver setting, you'll basically figure out that it actually runs all those solves on 1.01 inverted decay. For the most part, though, if you're doing week-to-week transfers, I would keep it at 0.85. Some people like to play around with that. Some people play with higher decay, lower decay. It's up to you. I mean, you might want to do your own
Yeah.
tests on it.
Although this is not a subjective thing,
Yep.
just to clarify, this is objectively 0.85 is objectively proven to be
Mm,
the best in terms of simulating decay
right.
in how much uncertainty we have. So for decay, I wouldn't suggest using other values for normal weeks, as Fran already pointed out. Yeah, and
Yep.
for the FT value, it's just completely subjective. I keep it lower because I don't know. I like to see intricate plans, but they never materialize because you tend to have injuries and other tactical stuff crop up. So yeah, completely your call.
Yeah, makes sense. Harry says he thinks the dynamic price changes allowing for a 50-man squad. The amount of injuries are also a big factor to analytics enjoying the season. I think I
Yeah.
think I agree with you in the sense that you can maximize EV a lot more than the regular sort of manager who doesn't like to have a strong bench would have. But I think the reality is, as I said, is that we still have had a lot of variance this season comparing and contrasting to previous seasons. So it's not just, for example, how much EV we've gained versus the field, but specifically how much points we've sort of realized against the EV that we've grabbed that has been a little
Yeah.
bit more ridiculous this season. So it's I think it's much more the variance myself thinking about that. But there are some
Yeah.
knockoff impacts as well. So I think we've had some pretty big injuries this season in FPL. So for example, when a big player gets injured and you don't have a strong bench, you're going to suffer a lot more than an analytics manager would who would have a stronger bench. So I think intuitively you're right there in terms of just the ability to grab expected value this season and rotate that value in and out of your bench. But sometimes it just
But
doesn't. Yeah,
yeah, sorry, I was going to say that the funny thing is that a lot of analytics managers chose not to play this season because of the prices. Because
yeah,
it for them it just made the game trivial in a sense.
mm.
And I do get the underlying point that it's trivial up to a certain point, right? Once price changes come into effect, it's
They're very
quite
volatile, and
the
we didn't
opposite.
get the
Exactly.
the most of them to be honest as well.
Yeah,
So
and for both of us, for the second wild card, you got absolutely like you got mad rich in on first wild card. I
Yeah.
got some price changes, but for the second wildcard, neither of us got anything. Like I don't think I've had a single player aside from Son who has had a rise of more than 0.2. So basically netting me 0.1 in sell value. So
Yeah.
the most I have had is 0.1 and Son with 0.2. And Son wasn't even a wildcard pick, so I can't even count him as part of the wildcard. So absolutely, it just adds to the advantage.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. And he also says that you should change Elanga's X-Mins.
Yeah, I've looked at changing
We
his
have, we have.
expects. The thing is, the reality is his odds actually aren't as high as you'd think. And I
Yeah.
will say that, you know, of all the players, if you look at their underlying stats, Elanga has beautiful underlying stats. His expected goal
Yes.
involvement is jaw-droppingly good. So yeah, I mean, if you want to trust those numbers more than, let's say, what models would project for Elanga, go for it. But
I
even his
think the
market
lack of
odds aren't.
penalties is the only problem, right? Especially
Yeah,
when you look at review EV, it's always the lack of penalties that, yeah,
yeah,
for example,
that's the
Madison, right?
biggest change this
Madison
week.
is
Yeah,
4.8, for example, Son is 6.1. So you can see the gap is primarily also,
it's
of
set
course, because
pieces
Madison
as well. Yeah.
doesn't have goal threat. So I guess it's because of that as well. But all I'm saying is lack of penalties really changes stuff in
Yeah,
terms
I,
of
I
EV.
think even
Yeah.
Gibbs White, for example, like it's like corner taking, these kind of things have like such a
Yes.
knock-on impact, and uh,
Yes.
I think you can see it more clearly when you look at the gulf of certain players, you know, from an MD versus market perspective. And yeah, you'll see Bruno gets affected, Madison gets affected quite often, and that's very normal. But Elanga, he's purely an open play threat, so I think the fact that his actual odds for market aren't that high this week is a little bit strange. But you know, I mean, once again, if you trust those numbers and you trust, for example, even the tactical setup, go for it. TSH said he's got no intentional wild card, but he's only got 7 players now with the Watkins injury. Once again, I think once if you're in that sort of position, just once again wait for the wild card, to sort or rather, sort of wait for the Watkins news to culminate. Hopefully, we'll have a brief update with the pressers for Gameweek 29, and maybe you'll have a better understanding of what the Watkins injury is. We all obviously also have some journalists who tend to give us hopefully
Hmm.
news, but the thing is with Gordon, as you can see, that news can change very quickly in terms of how drastic an injury is. So hopefully, of course, I would say just wait until the last possible second of the deadline before you make that decision. I would not wildcard still intuitively on this week. I just think if you don't have triple Spurs, I would go triple Spurs this week. Take hits for those triple Spurs players. And then there's obviously your other picks like Tony and Gibbs White, who in theory could actually be quite useful for you in the short term as well. So those are also players that I would take hits for. Defenders I wouldn't care so much about, and that's how I would approach it. And then maybe you can wild card in Gaming 30, which seems to be a very strong wild card right now, given the amount of injuries that we have. And of course, you know, the removal of Watkins from your team potentially for Gaming 30. But once again, you'll have
Yeah.
2 weeks of information and potentially fixtures being sort of concretized. So that will be huge.
Did you see that he corrected his wildcard to free it, right? So
Oh,
he's
sorry, I did not see
yeah,
that.
yeah, that's yeah, see,
I think
I
I
saw
think
that, yeah.
seven I think is still quite high. Once again, I would probably ask the question of whether you have more defenders or more attackers. If you've got more attackers
Yeah.
within that 7, then I think you're still in a good spot to
Yeah, because
continue without a
the
free
clean
hit.
sheet odds this week are atrocious. So
Yeah, no one's worth a hit basically. Yeah.
honestly, it could easily happen that we will have zero clean sheets in this
Yeah.
game week.
And
It's
that's a good
easily
point too,
possible.
because Harry
Yeah.
mentioned that the drop from Porro to X defender is larger than Johnson to Y midfielder, and I agree with that
Mm,
in a sense, but that's only if you
okay.
are expecting for Johnson to get, let's say, a 75-minute substitution. If you think, for example, Richarlison's fit to start because his expected value is insane, then I would disagree with that statement. So I think Johnson is around the
So,
cutoff. Werner is around the cutoff as
Wer-
well.
Werner's X-Mens are interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
he is not part of the Germany squad
Yeah.
for the international friendlies. So, would you think that boosts his chances? Because I don't think it has any substantial impact on whether he was already going to start, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have
I'm
any
not sure.
opinions on that?
Unfortunately, the Spurs game too doesn't come first, right? You have two fixtures that
Exactly.
come first. We're not going to get Spurs news, so you're not going to have the confidence to take Porro out of your team. So it's a bit of a moot argument. But of course, if we get some sort of lineup leak from Spurs and we get a Werner start, that could very well, particularly with the Watkins injury, change our minds. But I think one thing to point out too is if you go, let's say, double Brentford defense plus Doughty, that should cover Porro's EV quite easily because Brentford have some pretty decent EV this week, and if you can get, let's say, both the fullbacks right for Brentford, that's a
Yeah.
good position to
Yeah.
be in.
And you can have Konza and one Nottingham Forest defender like Nico Williams on the bench, just
Yeah,
in case.
yeah, very well.
Yeah, yeah.
As
So,
we were saying, she was planning to
any
avoid Tony.
other?
She was
Yeah,
so
like,
she's in the exact same position as you basically, and I think we discussed that as well. So I think
yeah,
that's a
exactly,
fair point.
exactly. Eh, hmm. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You mentioned Gordon, right? Because we still don't know exactly if he's
Yeah, but
like what's
apparently
the
he's been
nature of
called
his
up for
injury.
England, which
He has
is
been. He has been. You
I
know
love this
that that's
game.
happened previously as well, though, right?
But like a player gets called up and they leave the camp.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
they are injured, they just go into the camp because they don't want to lose the choice of, let's say, integrating with the squad
yeah.
in another sense. And also, Maguire has been called up, and Maguire and a lot of fans are angry. United fans are angry because this is typical Pogba or Cavani stuff, where these players are magically fit for their country, and then when they come to United, all of a sudden they're injured. And I'm not saying about Maguire at all, because he's one thing that you cannot say about Maguire is his attitude towards playing.
Hmm.
So I'm not claiming that at all, but it is quite strange that Maguire was called up and he is going for the international break.
Yeah.
I think I was referring to Lisandro Martinez about that because he has also been called up, and the nature of his injury suggested that there was no way he was going to be back anytime soon. So anyway, sorry. The thing about Gordon I wanted to ask was, do you think this is going to have an impact on his career overall? Because I'm starting to see so many parallels with Rooney, where
Mm.
he's playing through a broken foot with injections just to help United out, and in the long run, it obviously messed with his career, as in the longevity of his career.
I, I mean, hard to say. I think yeah, a lot of young players are getting a lot of minutes, and that's concerning. But I also think Rooney was probably a pretty bad case because he seemed like
Yeah, he's explosive and
yeah,
also on the
and
heavier side, so
probably didn't
it's
treat
quite a
treat his body as much as he
yeah, yeah,
as well as he should have really.
yeah. Every season he used to come from preseason and he used to be absolutely out of shape, and then he would get into shape for the season.
Yeah, like I'm not sort
Yeah.
of yeah like discrediting Rooney's discipline
No, no,
to
no. Of course
football,
not.
but it seems like I think there's like one aspect to taking care of your body and maximizing that element of the game, versus of course you maximizing just the footballing and the practice that comes with that. So I mean, even if you hear stories about him, it goes back to like his alcoholism as well.
Yeah, it
That's
does.
probably not as prevalent an element of the game now, but yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
it
I
is
hope
really old
Gordon will
school,
be
right?
fine
When you
is the big thing. But he is sort of being
yeah,
overplayed, and that's a huge concern. And there's like definitely contrasting camps, like a team like Liverpool. I mean, to be fair, they actually played a lot of starting
today,
players
yeah,
today
today.
for Sparta Prague, but generally,
they
I
made
think
sure that
they err on the side of caution with players,
yeah,
especially younger players who play a lot of minutes. And
yeah.
we'll have to see, of course, whether impacts will come out to younger players.
I think the objective today for Liverpool was to make sure that Sparta Praha never comes into European competitions again. It was so unnecessary the way they thrashed them today. It's so
I
bad.
was like,
It's so
yeah, we're just
bad.
gonna play Salah the full game because why not?
Okay, so we have some more questions. So Harry says, okay, it's not a question, but will be interesting to see how they adjust prices next year. I think they made a conscious effort to make the game fun by allowing everyone to have the best players.
I mean, do you think
I
the game's
don't
fun,
know.
more fun this season? I
Mm,
guess we can't judge that because
yeah,
we're a very specific audience.
I have no idea actually,
I would,
honestly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very very interesting to see, for example, like the end of season summaries, how people are sort of answering the polled questions that would come about as well.
No, I'm
Um,
thinking like the times when we used to have Aguero, Robin van Persie, Leighton Baines, you had a lot of players at extreme prices, which meant that you could never get to a team with all of these players in at the same time.
yeah,
So I think people often
that's
think
true.
back to those times where you could not afford teams like that, but it hasn't been the case for a long time, right? I mean, Holland Salah has been pretty much. I mean, I know there are a few teams that can't afford that, but for example, you could easily afford it on Wildcard 8. And as you pointed out, it did cost you some EV, but it could have easily gone the other way if, let's say, Holland had not gotten injured against or before the Luton game.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
Um, cool. I
Uh,
think. Oh, sorry.
Romelu says, would you say Udogi and Morgan Gibbs
I think
White
that
in
they're
for
both good
-4 to
transfers.
field 10? Yeah,
I would have to
I
say
would say
so.
yeah. Yes,
Just
yes.
because Udogi is incredible for Gaming 30. Like if you look at your
Yeah,
bench now for your defense in Gaming 30, and how that's going to sort of pan out. Everyone has a really bad defense on paper. Like, if
Yes,
anything, most people are
so bad.
expecting to play Gabriel, potentially even playing two Arsenal away from
Mm.
home. But yeah, it's a very bad defense, and he really, really covers an essential hole there. So, a hit for Udogi, considering that he's the lower expected value player for this week, makes a lot of sense as a transfer. And Morgan Gibbs White actually has decent fixtures as well. It just really
He has
depends
Crystal
on,
Palace, I think, and
yeah.
Everton to come. So absolutely. Omar
Um,
says, "Do you think Chilwell might be fit to start on game week 30?"
he could be, but I just think Chilwell's such a
He's
bad
not an
pick.
option, right? Yeah,
No,
exactly.
sorry,
He's
because I
not
just
an
think,
option.
first of
Yeah.
all, like you're not getting guarantees in terms of his role within the team. So like, if let's say he starts at left wing, he can be subbed off early, which we've seen early in the season. And I don't think Colwell's injury is that bad. So for me, Colwell's a bit more of a lock in the left back position than Chilwell is, and we'll have to see how that
Mm.
goes. But also at the sort of price that you're investing into with Chilwell, it's just not worth it for me. Like, I'd rather go with Gusto, who I think is brilliant, will lock down right back minutes until James comes back, but could very well still continue to start because he's just played brilliantly and doesn't have that sort of level of competition in different roles. And you will probably basically get consistency until you finally see, for example, that moment in time when James steps onto the field, which is very unlikely. It makes more sense for them to manage James for the rest of his career than waste, for example, like Gusto, who can still deliver results for that team. But I mean, that's sort of my thought on it. And Chilwell, yeah, that price gap, I'd probably even rather go for someone like Disasi if you must, or even Petrovic. Really,
Yeah, I had banned Dizazi from my solves, but
that's fine. Yeah, which I
yeah.
think is sensible.
Yeah. Harry says the only issue with Brentford fullbacks is their attacking output is reliant if they play back four or back five. Yeah, to a certain extent, and I have seen people speculate about what would happen if, for example, they were saying that Lewis Potter played left wing back, which is why they played a back three. But if Regulon were to come back, they could easily switch to a back four. And
Hmm.
I suppose it is, but I don't think there's enough. We will never have enough sample size to compare the two over the course of one season.
Yeah,
So whatever EV baselines you have, you just have to go with those baselines.
yeah. I think it still comes back down to Richarlison as well and how strong he is. Because that additional 5% of clean sheet odds for Brentford is something like worth 0.3 EV, arguably, right? So
Yeah,
that makes quite a big difference that you'd probably not assume as much. Like if Richarlison, for example, was good to go and play 60 minutes, I think I had a look, and it's not reasonable to go Richarlison, for example, at four EV. I agree with that. You probably want to keep Porto instead. But yeah, if
yeah,
seemed like if you actually think he'll clock any more than that, then we're verging on territories where it makes sense to drop Porto. But
yeah.
generally agree with you. Yeah, Porto should be in all our drafts.
Omarim
Um,
says thought about triple up on Gusto, Chilwell, and Petrovic. I think
I like
Gusto and
Nicholas
Petrovic
Jackson
is
as an
fine,
idea down the line. Yep.
and Nicholas Jackson absolutely. I was
Also, like,
initially
also,
banning him,
also
but his
Palm. Can I
minutes are
can
crazy,
I
right?
mention Cole Palmer, or are we
Oh
not
my
allowed?
god.
Yeah. Now we know Watkins is injured.
Yeah,
Repent, master.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah,
If
I
you
think I
if
think
you go
we're
back and listen to certain sections of the pod, we have covered what we would do in case
yeah.
we know
We
that
we
he's not
have
going
we
to
have
play.
me, a free hitter, who's going potentially without Watkins, and we have Schadenfreude who owns Watkins, and he's also planning to sort of manage Watkins, which is most likely through a Tony transfer,
Yeah,
for his own regular
yeah,
team. But yeah, so those are kind of our thoughts for this game week. Thank you guys so much for
yeah.
tuning in,
Thank you, guys.
and happy solving.
Yeah, bye.